Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Post-fight review for Jermaine Franklin versus Issac Munoz. And this was quite an interesting fight because Jermaine Franklin went all out, threw the kitchen sink at Munoz and was not able to budge him. But Munoz later in the fight started to come into it just a little bit, but it was lopsided in the end on the cards, and justifiably so. Munoz having a little success, but Franklin dominating pretty much throughout. But this fight again proved that Jermaine Franklin has a lack of power, and at a certain level, he's not able to hurt his man in front of him and get them out of there. And it wasn't for lack of trying in this one. So we'll go through some of the action and then a few thoughts, because I guess you could kind of say counterintuitively, the fact that he can't actually knock the skin off a rice pudding is going to guarantee that he'll get more fights with the likes of an Anthony Joshua or Dillian Whyte, those sorts of names, because he can't hurt them. And that is why he'd be picked for similar fights. Say, for example, if Dubois loses to Alexander Usyk, Jermaine Franklin's probably a decent comeback opponent. You have that opportunity where Jermaine Franklin will probably occupy a gatekeeper sort of role, although he does not see himself in that light. Although I think the reality is he's already been used in that light. He was used as the tune-up for both Whyte and also Joshua. But the first round, bit of feeling out from both Jermaine Franklin and Issac Munoz. You had a case where they were trading shots, having a look, jabs, all that sort of stuff. And it was ironic because the further the fight went on into rounds 2 and then 3 and 4, Munoz's head movement and just all round the movement in general basically evaporated. He looked okay in round 1, but as soon as Franklin thought, okay, I can go after this guy, he started to really wind into his work, started to land pretty much whatever he wanted. And through rounds 3 and 4 in particular, he just went after Issac Munoz, really throwing everything but the kitchen sink. There were some pretty audacious shots coming in. There was a long lead left uppercut that shook Issac Munoz, or should I say, it rattled his head and the sweat just flew off. But the thing was, Munoz was taking these, and after about round 5, Franklin started to look like he was starting to just slow down a touch. And at that point, you had Issac Munoz starting to go, okay, well, I think it's about time I threw something back, because he looked like a virtual punching bag from round 2 to round 5. But round 6, there was actually a moment where he took a huge left hook from Jermaine Franklin, or it looked like a huge left hook, and he didn't even blink. And then he just stared at Franklin, effectively trolling him, and he was kind of trying to wind Franklin up a little bit as the fight wore on. And you could see Franklin was starting to get, frustrated because he couldn't hurt him. He, maybe was a bit guilty of headhunting, but Franklin's one of these guys who's got all the shots in the book. He just doesn't have the power behind any of them to really put a dent in his man. And we saw that again. So what went from Franklin looking for a highlight reel stoppage in rounds 3 and 4, really going all out, was a case of Franklin starting to tire, starting to miss some shots, look a little bit sloppy, and as a result, Munoz being able to hit and land more frequently on Franklin as the fight wore on towards its end. And the fact that it went 10 rounds, the full distance, missed opportunity for Franklin. He wanted to make a statement, get his man out of there. I guess the thing is, with the matchmaking, they brought in Munoz late in the piece after Franklin's other opponent was pulled out. They'd picked a guy who was super durable. He'd faced basically no one of note. He was unheralded into this one. No one had seen him effectively. But what he did prove was he had a decent chin. And when Franklin started to slow down the feet and the hand speed, Munoz, it was a much more competitive fight as things wore on. And you could see some of those 203 amateur bouts that Munoz was carrying on about ahead of the fight. But in those first about 5 rounds, especially, rounds 3 and 4, looked like a virtual punching bag. But the fact that he had one hell of a chin obviously put him in good stead, and he was able to see out the fight, and largely didn't look like he was hurt at any real point, although he was taking a lot of heavy leather from Franklin, who just couldn't hurt him, couldn't put a dent in him. And this is why Franklin has been an opponent for the likes of Joshua and Whyte, as I mentioned up front, because He can make a competitive fight, but he can't hurt his opponents. Past a certain level, he cannot put a dent in his man. And this is why he's a safe option going forward, and I believe he will continue to basically be an evolving gatekeeper. You've had a lot of guys in recent years filling those sorts of roles. I kind of see Franklin starting to occupy that role. Maybe he's not quite at the level of, where Derek Chisora and a Carlos Takam has been operating at, but I think that Franklin will get more paydays on the basis that he's competitive, but he probably doesn't pose the risk that a puncher does. And this is why we see punchers, who are more risky, not being taken on as comeback opponents or opponents in general. Guys who can box and move a bit and, can make you work like a Franklin, there's always going to be paydays there for them at some point in time. So I think Franklin, off the back of this, it's a bit of a missed opportunity. He will no doubt be saying that he's disappointed that he wasn't able to get his man out of there, but you have to give credit also to Munoz, who will probably get some decent paydays off of the back of this as well. I think that he can be in there with different prospects who need rounds because he's durable. I think it's one of these cases, maybe similar to a Konstantin Doboshenko, where, very durable, but the offense, he didn't have a lot of power. He didn't hurt Franklin at all. And, it's unlikely to be able to put a dent in some guys who are coming up. If they've got a decent chin, they'll see him off and probably, put a bit of beating on him, but it'll go rounds and the seasoning will be good for the prospects. I know some people will say that maybe he's a bit too advanced for the likes of a Solomon Dakers or a Johnny Fisher, but I think those are the sorts of fights that those guys probably need at a certain point. So, Jermaine Franklin, what next? Where next? Who next? I don't know if he's got any other options, or Matchroom, I should say, on him, because after that Joshua fight, this was one where Matchroom had him on the card as a result of that previous deal. So maybe he will continue to work with Matchroom. Don't know if there's another fight. Maybe if they have fights in that area, remember Clarissa Shields, and they've also got Alicia Baumgartner, maybe they would look to have Franklin as a hometown fighter if in that sort of Detroit area on the card. This wouldn't have been an expensive fight to put on. Ultimately, though, Franklin shows what he can do, where his level is, which I still think he's a top 25 to top 30 guy. There's no shame in that, but the lack of power does hurt his stock, and I think eventually, he will be largely more seen as a guy that will go rounds and give you a tough fight. And if you're good enough, you'll beat him and advance on to that world level. I think based on this again, Jermaine Franklin's going to struggle to get to the heights that he believes he can get to. There's no shame in being a guy who's, one of the top 30 or so heavyweights in the world. But there are levels, and I'm not sure Franklin has the power, or the fact that he doesn't have the power to hurt guys like Joshua and White, we've already seen it, is going to hamper him. And I don't think that's unfair to say that. I know there'll be a couple of people rocking into the comments saying that I'm hating on him. It's not at all. He's a very good fighter. He has all the shots. He's got the tools, but he lacks power, and that will hold him back. And we've seen it hold him back already. He lost to Dillian White, couldn't hurt White. Lost to Anthony Joshua, couldn't hurt Anthony Joshua. And this is why he will still get more work at a similar level at different points, because good fighter, but probably can't hurt the man in front of him. What do you make of the fight? What do you make of Munoz, the late replacement? I think he credited himself well overall, given the circumstances, and probably has bagged a couple of future paydays somewhere. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.